The tip ticker is up because today I'm going to show you tons and tons of tips on creating drum patterns. We're going to cover some basic drum pattern ideas plus some advanced ones as well. So let's start by putting a kick on the 1 and a snare on the 2 and the 4. This is the fundamental framework for making beats, so it's a good place to start. When it comes to building your hi-hat patterns, you probably already know about the autofill options down here. But what you might not know about is the advanced fill tool here. This can help you introduce some really unique rhythms into your beat that you might not have thought of otherwise. For example, going into Euclidean mode and then hitting the randomize button can get you some really interesting results. For now though, let's just stick with a basic hi-hat pattern. By the way, if you want to tip me for all of my tips, hit the like and sub button. It really does help my channel out, and if you ever get tired of seeing my videos, feel free to unsubscribe, it's alright. Next up we have our open hi-hat. There are no strict rules for placing these by any means, but some common approaches are to put your open hi-hat leading into your snare, or at the end of your loop. But depending on the sample or sound that you use, it might be a good idea to control the open hi-hat's envelope. Let me explain what this means. As you can hear with this open hi-hat, it continues to play beyond how long this note is. But if you want more control over these notes, go into the sound settings, turn on the envelope and make this exact shape that I have here. Now, whenever the note plays, it only plays for however long you actually make your MIDI note. Next up, let's add some kicks into our pattern. It's entirely up to you where you want to place your additional kicks to build out your pattern, but there are some important ideas that we should cover. When it comes to your kicks and your snares, whenever you have two of these playing back to back, at times it can be a good idea to turn one of these into a ghost note. For example, we have two kicks back to back here. And in this area, we have a kick playing right here. We also have a snare playing right here on the second beat, if you remember. If I hit Alt and V, this will show me the notes from my other patterns. And as you can see, we have a snare right here. If we preview this note, we can confirm that is a snare. And by the way, to preview notes like I just did, all I'm doing here is holding down Alt and then right-clicking on my mouse. So like I mentioned, when we have two of these prominent drum sounds side by side, turning one into a ghost note can be a good idea. We can do this by simply just turning down the velocity. This can help your drum patterns not become too overpowering or dominant if that becomes an issue in your beat. You can also play with where these notes land as well. Right now they are perfectly on grid, but if you want to get really edgy and dangerous with your drum pattern, try moving these notes around. To do this, just hold down Alt. This will let you click and drag your notes around without having them instantly snap onto the grid lines. Getting your notes to hit early or late are both viable options depending on whatever you're making. If you end up getting too wild with your placement and you want them to go back onto grid, hit Ctrl and Q. This will instantly snap them onto the grid line. But what you could do instead is hit Alt and Q. This will bring up your quantizer tool, which can let you decide just how close to the grid lines you want to move your notes. But this quantizer tool can also help you in a few different ways that you might not know about. Let's go into the hi-hat pattern so I can show you what I mean. Right now we have our hi-hat pattern, which is completely on time and on grid. We could definitely hold down Alt and move these notes one by one. Or we could go into the grid area up here, select none. This lets you move your notes around freely without having to hold down Alt. But the problem here is that moving each note hand by hand could end up hurting your frail, calcium deficient bones. So instead, we could use our quantizer tool to move all of our notes for us and provide a unique rhythm into our beat instantly. To do this, just hit Alt and Q to bring this guy up again. Head over to the template area and test out these different templates. Not only will these change the timing of your notes slightly, but it can also change the velocity of your notes and again give you a new and unique feel into your drum pattern. By the way, this is why I recommend building your patterns in the piano roll itself rather than use the channel rack. Using the piano roll opens up a ton of shortcut possibilities just like this. Speaking of which, let's cover some other shortcuts that you'll probably need to help you with your drum patterns. The chopper tool is useful for creating stutters if you like to make trap beats, for example. To do this, let's first extend all of our notes out. We can do this by hitting Ctrl and L. This makes every note extend into the next one. Then just select whatever note you want to turn into a stutter and hit Alt and U. And from here you can just select how stuttery the stutter is by using the stutter dial. Hitting Alt and X brings up the scaler. This lets you control the velocity of all your notes at once instead of having to change it note by note. We also have Alt and R to bring up the randomizer, which lets you randomize your note velocity or your panning, for example. Having said that though, I do think that using randomization might not be the best idea. Controlling your drum pattern a bit more manually and being more hands-on is probably a better idea instead of leaving it all to random chance. So let's just remove these tips. Introducing a triplet rhythm into your beat is a great way to add variation into your drum pattern. To do this, simply just go into the same grid menu that we looked at before and choose 1/3 beat. This changes where the grid lines are, giving you a triplet grid line to work with. In terms of best practices though, you probably don't want to build your entire pattern using the triplet grid line. This is just disorienting. I think I'm gonna throw up. So just using the triplet grid line to make short little switch ups every now and again in your drum pattern is a great way to keep the rhythm interesting. Now if you've built a 1-bar loop for your drum pattern and you want to quickly turn it into a 2-bar loop, maybe to make some more variations across a longer drum loop, one way you could do this is by going into each pattern's piano roll, highlight your entire pattern by hitting Ctrl and A, and then duplicate by hitting Ctrl and B. This will duplicate your pattern out, but as you may have picked up on, doing this one by one for all of your sounds might get tedious, especially if you're using a lot of drum sounds for your pattern. So a smarty pants way of doing this quicker is by going into the playlist instead, adding your drum pattern in, duplicate this out, select both patterns, and then hit Ctrl and G. This glues both patterns together and puts it into a brand new pattern. So as you can see, this pattern here is twice as long. A real time saver here. A tip for improving your drum patterns is to introduce polyrhythms into your drum loop. This can help your drum patterns feel far more full and detailed. For example, what I can do is take this loop from this percussion pack here, and you'll notice this has a very different rhythm compared to what I've built in my drum pattern so far. And by adding this in, take a listen to how much more full my drum pattern starts to sound. The reason why this ends up sounding much more full is because we now have many new notes that play when my other sounds in my drum pattern aren't playing. You also may have noticed that I use Fruity Slicer to bring in this loop into my drum pattern. When you use loops or drum breaks, using a sampler like this can be a great idea. The reason why is because it can automatically stretch your loop to fit the BPM of your beat. This loop here is 90 BPM, which is faster than my beat's BPM. So if I'd added this into my beat as it is, you can hear it doesn't align with my beat at all, and it finishes prematurely. And we all know finishing prematurely can really ruin your night. So not only can a sampler help you with this problem, but you can also control just how prominent and full you want your loop to sound. Here I can shrink how long each sound is in this loop. Now this layer doesn't add quite as much into my beat, leaving space for other sounds to possibly be added in. Or I could stretch how long each sound is and make it much more prominent in this beat. Different loops can introduce different rhythms into your beat, and some may stand out more than others. For example, if we use this loop here instead, because many of these notes fall at the exact same time as my hi-hat pattern, for example, it's a pretty straightforward 8th note rhythm. It doesn't really stand out as much compared to my first loop and how off some of those notes were. Sometimes when you build a drum pattern out and it doesn't sound great, it's not actually the pattern that you built that's a problem, but the sounds themselves that are causing you these issues. So if you're interested, I made an entire video on this very idea. If you have problems with your drums and drum patterns, it's going to be extremely helpful to watch that video. It should be showing up on the screen right now. But for now, that's it when it comes to drum patterns. Look at all those tips. If you've enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe. Head over to betterbeatmaker.com to check out my full online beatmaking course. My free drum kit's available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord to join my producer community. And I'll see you next time.